Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. No, it's not your screen. My video quality is much better than it's been in all my previous videos due to the fact that I have finally gotten around to buying myself a new camera to record. It's a purchase I've had in mind for a long time, and part of the reason why you haven't seen me for a little while is because I was just getting really sick of the quality of the stuff that was coming out of my old camcorder. So today we're gonna be talking about money. This is a topic that's quite hot button in archaeology for a bunch of different reasons, mostly the whole part where we don't really get paid enough, and then people think that we don't really get paid at all, and all this kind of stuff. So today what I kind of want to talk about is how much do we actually get paid, what are the differences in pay, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, it can't be exhaustive because there are so many jobs in archaeology that have different pay grades. So today we're going to focus specifically on what commercial archaeologists make in the UK, and with some comparison to what they make in Canada, and then just kind of talking about how everything compared. I've had it in mind for a while because I think it's an important thing to consider, especially if you are looking at university programs and investing in the qualifications for being an archaeologist, and you kind of want to have an idea of what your kind of salary is going to be in a career going forward if you're considering commercial archaeology. So one of the big things that archaeologists struggle with in terms of how much money they get paid is that a lot of people view it as this thing of like, oh, well, you love it, it's this hobby, ergo either shouldn't have to pay you for it or you should be willing to accept very little to pay for it since you actually get to enjoy it, unlike my job in an office where I just put numbers in a computer all day and, you know, I really hate it, but, you know, I deserve to make more money from doing that, which is, you know, not a very good argument. There's this perception that, you know, so in terms of wages, they differ. Obviously, they differ in the country that you work in. They differ in the sector that you work in. So in terms of like, if you're a commercial archaeologist, if you're an academic archaeologist, if you're someone who's working for a museum, if you're someone that's working for like a local authority, like the council or something, like all those different jobs will pay obviously different wages, and they have different parameters that they go by for how they determine your wages. It also varies by like your specific location in which country you work in. So best example here in the UK, if you're working and living in London, you tend to get a bit more put onto your wages because the living costs there are much higher than everywhere else in the country. As well, your wages will change depending on the projects. You know, huge infrastructure projects sometimes have a bit more leeway to pay you more, or if they're really desperate to get people to work somewhere, they'll maybe offer more money or overtime or something to try and draw people in. You sometimes get project bonuses, which will factor into how much you actually make overall. And as well, obviously, different companies offer different wages. It's also really key to keep in mind, and I get stuck into this a lot, is that your wage will change throughout your lifetime. Like any other job, the way it tends to go is that when you start out, you make less money, and the more you work at it, the more money you make. And this is true in archaeology. When you start out, yeah, the pay is not great, but as you move up the ladder, it gets better. And, you know, there are people that make very good wages working in archaeology. So enough talk about speculative stuff. Let's look at some numbers, which honestly are not my strongest suit. I spent some time doing spreadsheets and calculations this morning. They're not 100% accurate. So basically the way that I did this was I took all the wages on Badger advertisements on their job page, I put that into a spreadsheet, and I did all of these things with it, and then I've come out with some totals, which we're going to look at today. It was a change for me when I moved to the UK and started working here in terms of like just looking at a job and determining like how much money that gets you, because in Canada generally when you look at a job, you're quoted like either a per day rate or like a per hour rate is what you look at. So you say, okay, well, we'll offer you this job and we're paying you this much per hour. As well, we generally get paid every 2 weeks in Canada. In the UK, most jobs you get paid once a month. And then as well, when they're looking at salaries, they're not telling you how much you're making per hour, they're telling you how much you make per year. So it'll be like £19,000 a year. So worth noting that here in the UK, we have this thing called CIFA, which is the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists. It has a royal charter and everything. They're kind of like a professional body. They lay out guidelines, companies are supposed to follow them. You apply when you're a company to be recognized as a registered organization. in order to be a registered organization, that means you have to uphold certain standards. Part of what they do as a professional body is they recommend salaries. So they have salary recommendations, which is how much they think people should be getting paid, and they have salary minima, which is the minimum that they require companies to be paying staff at certain levels. Now, as a member of SEFA, you're either a practitioner, an associate, or a member. So the pay minima are attached to these three. That does not mean that if you are a member of SEFA, that automatically any job that you work at, that company has to be paying you that salary minima. It's more like if you're doing a job that they would expect you to be a member of SEFA for, they should be offering you that minimum. So you can't just walk into a job as a site assistant, which is the lowest tier of people that are working at archaeological companies, and say, I'm a member of SEFA, which is the highest tier of SEFA membership. Ergo, you need to be paying me like £34,000 a year. That's not how it works. So what I've done is I've taken the salaries off of advertised jobs for 5 levels of commercial archaeology jobs in the UK. I put them in a spreadsheet and I calculated the average salary for that level of job. So be aware that the salaries that I'm talking about here, they can be certainly higher because the more experience you have, the more money you tend to make, and they can be lower. So it's not a blanket, this is how much people get paid if they're at this level. It does vary. And like I said, it varies company to company. So before I get into all of these salaries and everything, I just want to give you kind of a point of reference to show like how these things all stack up together. In the UK currently, there are kind of like 2 standards against which you can kind of like measure your wages. There's minimum wage, and there's the living wage. So the living wage is how much people argue you actually need to like live, and the minimum wage is the minimum wage. Why they're not the same, I don't really know, but I'm not gonna get into that. Currently in the UK, the minimum wage that you need to pay people is £7.83 per hour. The living wage is £8.45 an hour and £9.75 for people who are living in London. So like I said, that's that markup happening for people that are living within London because it costs so much more to live there. With those in mind, the lowest pay grade that I found was for a trainee. So this is someone that won't have any previous archaeological experience and is generally taken on for like 6 months to a year or whatever, and they kind of focus more heavily on training that person. They obviously get paid the least. The one advert I could find for trainees was for £16,558 a year. So that works out to about £9.19. So this job was outside of London, which means that it is above the living wage that's recommended for people who are outside of London. Next up, we have site assistants. So they are, not trainees, and people tend to be site assistants for anywhere between like 2 and 5 years, gaining experience before they start to move up the ladder. So a lot of the adverts that I looked at had a salary range, like I said, for people who are less and more experienced. So I took all the top and the bottom salaries and then all the ones that just had just one salary. I put them together and then I calculated the average. So the average salary for a site assistant is £19,763, which works out to about £10.94 an hour. So again, above the living wage by about £2. That's kind of nice. 19,000 is more than what I got when I first started out as a site assistant, and I think was about what I was paid when I last stopped working as a site assistant. It's enough to live off of, maybe not enough to really save up for a house, but it's certainly enough to be able to pay rent, bills, and whatever, and still have a little bit left over for yourself. Up on the ladder, we have project supervisor. So again, people who are starting to move up the ladder. They have a couple of years experience and they've demonstrated that they can lead. Their job is becoming less about digging the archaeology, more about telling people what needs to be dug and then making decisions on site about how to proceed, and perhaps managing like smaller groups of people. The average salary for a project supervisor or supervisor is £21,872 a year, which works out to £12.15 an hour. So £2 above what a site assistant is and a couple pounds above the living wage. And then after that we have project officers, which are people that, again, much less digging. They might do that occasionally, but their role tends to be a lot more about managing a site, managing people, managing resources, coordinating with clients, managers, all this stuff. So a more senior role. So average for them, from the adverts I looked at, was £24,250 a year, which works out to £13.47 an hour. Now this is where a lot of people have problems with our wages, because the leap from a project supervisor to a project officer in terms of responsibility is quite big, but their pay does not reflect the massive increase in responsibility that they suddenly have. And that's where a lot of people have problems, and where a lot of disputes in pay tend to come from, is that they just don't feel like for what they're expected to be responsible for, they don't make enough money. There's only really a £1 difference between a project supervisor and a project officer versus the amount of difference there is between their jobs. So the last category we're looking at here is a project manager. So this, which works out to £19 and 2p an hour. Again, this is a much bigger leap up into project management, and this is an average, so they get paid. There are project managers that get paid less, there are project managers that get paid more. It's a bit more reflective of the amount of work that you do, but it's one that a lot of people transition to as they move up the ladder, and especially for people who are wanting to have a bit more of a regular home life. They don't want to be away every week, that kind of thing. There's an intermediary level here that I haven't covered, which are people that are called senior archaeologists. They tend to sit between a project officer and a project manager, but not every company uses them, and these 5 I talked about are the most common ones that you see across UK archaeology companies. So as you can see, we are not paid, you know, the same as someone working a minimum wage job or even like a living wage job. We are paid above, you know, these averages. That being said, we aren't paid that much. And the big gripe that people have is that a lot of people feel that we don't get paid as much money as we deserve, considering the amount of education that a lot of archaeologists tend to have. So when I say that, I mean people who have undergraduate degrees, master's degrees, PhDs, all go into commercial archaeology. They've spent a lot of money on getting that education. They're probably in debt for getting that education, and how much they get paid doesn't seem to reflect all of the money they've sunk in to get the qualifications for the job. Especially when you compare us to other similar kind of like consultancy, like pre-planning environmental professions. We just don't really seem to get as much money as we feel we deserve. So the next big question leading on to that is, why is that? And there's a couple different reasons for that. So like I said earlier, there's this perception that, well, you're an archaeologist, you know, you love what you do, so you should just kind of be willing to take less money in order to do it, which like isn't true. There are people who truly love finance and numbers but get paid hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars to do that. You know, why can't it be, why can't we deserve to have the same? The biggest obstacle to this in commercial archaeology is the way that we get work, which is tendering for a job. So for those of you who don't know, when someone has been told that they need to get archaeological work done for their project, they do this thing called an invitation to tender, where they basically hand out packages to companies and they say, this is what we need, these are the basic parameters, this is the project, go away, design a project, tell us how much it's going to cost, and then they, from everyone that submits that, they decide who they're going to employ for the job. So there can be a lot of competition for jobs, and it does tend that, especially for certain jobs, people will always choose the lowest bidder. We live in a capitalist society. That's the way things tend to be. That doesn't necessarily mean it's right, and it can lead to some really problematic things happening. So, you know, some companies will submit proposals at cost, so they are not expecting to make a profit in order to get that job, because they might be depending on getting later works that they can make money off of later. They might sometimes just submit something that's really unfeasible, but the client has no better idea of how it should be done, and they just think, oh, that person's £10,000 cheaper than that one, I'll go with that, without realizing that maybe that company hasn't exactly been honest, or maybe they've only calculated for the absolute minimum of what needs to be done, rather than considering, oh, well, we're probably going to encounter this, so we'll build some money in case that happens so we can plan around that. This is not just an archaeological problem. That's something that I think that happens throughout the construction sector. You only really have to look at the collapse of Carillion, a major construction company, to see how, you know, kind of cutting corners and kind of that stuff really doesn't benefit you in the long run. This is not something that always happens, because the larger the project it is, you know, the less risk they want to take and the more money they probably have for this kind of thing. So they don't want to like gamble on this stuff as much as others. But I've been told that on smaller projects run by like communities or, you know, councils whose budgets have been slashed, they will almost always be forced to go with the lowest paying contractor, and obviously a lower paying contractor can't afford to pay their staff more money. I also have not factored into this subsistence pay. So subsistence is pay that you should receive if you are spending the night away from home while you're at work. So generally when that happens, you get your accommodation paid for, and you get this kind of like little bit of money to help you pay for food and whatever. It will change in the UK depending on where you're staying. So if you're staying somewhere where you're gonna have to go out and eat, it'll be more money, because obviously it costs a bit more money to eat out than to eat in. And then if you have somewhere with a kitchen, you get slightly less money. So this is not supposed to be taxed. It's not supposed to be taxed in your pay. And generally, a lot of places tend to pay you about £15 if you have to go out to eat, and about £7.50 if you're staying in to eat. It is important that this is not something that should be factored into your like per annum pay calculation. That should just be your hourly rate of how much you get paid, and not including anything else that's added on, like bonuses or subsistence or whatever. Subs essentially are compensation for the fact that you are working away from home. So how does this all compare to other places? Canada, where I've worked, I spoke to an ex-coworker and friend of mine. She says that the couple of companies that she knows, they start at about $20 an hour plus $50 of subsistence per day that they're away, and that will change slightly, which is good and is better than the UK rates. It is not tons better, but it is better than the UK rates, especially in terms of the subsistence. To compare, someone in Canada starts at $20 an hour plus $50 subs. If you calculate all these UK numbers, someone starting out gets about $18.67 an hour plus $25 subs a day. So the difference between the hourly rate isn't that big, but the difference between the subs certainly is. Now, this makes it look like Canadian archaeologists are much, much better paid, but there's another thing to consider. Canadian archaeologists are not all employed year-round because the ground freezes. So in the UK, generally, even if you're a site assistant, you can pretty much guarantee that you're going to have work year-round. It might go up and down, but there's a good chance that you'll be able to find projects fairly consistently throughout the year. In Canada, unless you're very, very favored by a company or you're like a supervisor and above, you cannot guarantee that you are going to be working throughout the winter. From about like October, November, when the ground freezes, to when it thaws, you can't guarantee that you have work. So therefore, they actually, even though they get paid more per hour, they might end up making less in total per year because they're not working as consistently. And that is approximate because, again, in the UK, everyone's on temporary contracts, so you can end up going 6 weeks, however long, without a job. But in general, because we have the potential to work year-round, we have the potential to make just as much money as a Canadian. So obviously, commercial archaeologists are not the only kind of people that can call themselves archaeologists out there. There are posts across a variety of sectors and heritage. The one that we tend to kind of get compared to a lot is academia. So people that are working at universities as lecturers, as research people, doing postdocs, doing PhDs, all that kind of stuff. I don't have as much information about on the pay for that. I did look at the some jobs that were being advertised for universities. So I found 2 that were advertising for lecturers, which I don't know if that's a tenured position or not. And they were above 35,000 plus pounds a year. And then there was one for a research assistant that was between 25 and 29,000 pounds per year. So a research assistant, that's kind of a starting off job once you've finished your PhD and whatever. That's a pretty good starting wage, especially in comparison to a commercial archaeologist. And 35,000 plus, obviously that's a great wage. However, again, need to consider here that people with PhDs, they have spent a lot more of their time and money investing in that education. So they might be making more money than you now, but they've also just spent about like 8 to 10 years in school either not making money or not making a lot of money. So that is to be considered. And as well, in academic posts, there's a lot more competition for the actual jobs that come up, and you're starting in the workforce a lot later than if you just maybe graduated from university and went straight into commercial archaeology. Alright, so this video's been a bit longer, but you know, I have to make up for my absence, so we're gonna wrap things up now. Archaeologists generally don't live under the poverty line unless for some reason there is just not a lot of work going around. We don't get paid ridiculously well. We get paid almost or pretty much enough to, like I said, be able to afford like rent, bills, and then have a little bit left aside for savings, treats for yourself, all that kind of stuff. It could certainly be better. It would be great for it to be better, but it's going to take a couple things for that to change. The public needs to emphasize the fact that they find heritage interesting, and there needs to be support about preserving and recording heritage and showing that it is actually a valuable thing that we need to be doing, rather than kind of like an indulgence by the construction companies to the archaeologists that they're letting us do this. We also need to have more solidarity between companies, or I don't know, some kind of system in place to enforce so that, you know, companies aren't constantly undercutting each other in order to compete for jobs, because obviously in order to pay you, a company needs to be bringing in enough work to pay your wage. There are companies that undercut each other, and even if, you know, you work for a good company that doesn't do that, you know, they're one company. It needs to be a collective thing in order to change this process. The way the tender system works, I've talked about this so many times with my non-archaeological boyfriend who reads about economics and stuff. You know, the way the tender system works, where, you know, the lowest bid wins, is a problem. It would be better if they had a system in where, you know, the second lowest or the third lowest bid is the one that wins. And you know, a lot of it is also up to the government. They need to show that heritage is valuable and that it needs to be preserved and lead the way. You know, if they could stop cutting everyone's budgets, that would also be really nice. This is obviously not something that only archaeologists suffer in terms of like, we make less money than we think we deserve, and maybe we're being a bit arrogant for thinking that we deserve to make more money, but it's, you know, it is something that people need in order to live. I had someone say to me once when I was kind of griping about pay that, oh, well, Rachel, money isn't everything. And I said to that person, yeah, but it's a lot. And, you know, money can buy you security. And the person who said that money isn't everything probably never had to do without it, or had to worry about where their bills were going to be paid from, and rent, and how are they going to feed themselves or their family and stuff like that. Having a good wage goes a long way towards security and to making people feel content. You know, it is something that archaeologists like to whinge and gripe about. It is a unifying thing across every unit I've worked for. But the thing that's really going to make things change is action. So if you're going to complain about it, at least also take steps to try and change it. And that doesn't just mean complaining about it somewhere publicly, vocally on a forum like, you know, the Badger Facebook group, but doing things like joining a union. And then if you think that, you know, you have a valid case for a pay dispute, taking that to your employer. And as well, like I said, the companies need to make more of an effort so that, you know, they're all, you know, putting in reasonably priced tenders, and it's not just, you know, 4 of them are doing that and then 1 of them's just coming in and undercutting all the rest of it. But that's, again, it's a company culture thing, and we do live in a capitalist society where money governs how successful people are and these things. So it's not the kind of thing that you can just like solve with one solution to change one thing. It's like a multifaceted problem. But yeah, like as you may notice, I haven't included salaries and stuff for people who work in the US, Europe, like anywhere else besides UK and Canada, because that's what I know. If you have anything relevant to add to the discussion, please put it in the comments down below. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video and this much improved video quality. I'm hoping to be able to make a couple more. I'm about to go visit some family, so I won't be online for a little while. But I have a couple things in the pipeline, which I know I always say. I recently got over 1,000 subscribers, so thank you very much for continuing to follow me. Even despite this one milestone that I've reached, I still can't get monetized, which is ironic in a video that I am talking about money. But that's fine. As I've said before, I don't do this to kind of supplement my income in any way, and I don't really expect to ever really be able to do that. If it turns out the opposite way, you know, that would be really nice, but I don't have all my hopes pinned on that. As per usual, my social media is down in the description box if you'd like to give me a follow there. And if you have anything constructive to add to this conversation or anything that you'd like to say, or if you just want to say hi, put it down in the comments below. Thank you so much guys for watching. I will see you next time.